Here we go. Let's do this.
We've got one life, one shot. Who do you want to be? What do you want to do? Addicted to Betterment, a podcast to inspire us to keep going, to try something new, to dream, to think big, bigger, to overcome. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
It's David here, addicted to Betterment, and man, are you in for a treat today? And I want to share first with you that I am so obsessed and believe so strongly in the law of attraction. And it always cracks me up when I share this thought with friends and I sense that, they'll either suggest something like, I don't know if I believe in the law of attraction. And I always chuckle at that. It's like not believing in the law of gravity. If I jump off my house, there's no chance that I'm possibly going to float through the neighborhood. I'm going to fall straight to the ground and I'm going to bust my face. And the reality is every single human, it doesn't matter whether you believe in the law of attraction, you are living out the law of attraction. The reality is, are we putting intention behind it? And so today's episode, and we're kicking off a series with one of my good friends, and it's a direct result of manifestation and law of attraction. And what I want to share is, so the name of our show is Addicted to Betterment. And it was a passion project that I did with my amazing wife, God's loudest gift in my life. And the reason for it was we both have windy roads that led us to today. And both of us have stories, lots of failure, lots of successes, some bad decisions, some great decisions. And part of that was the doing the work to overcome and be the human that we want to be, the human that we believe we're placed on this earth to be. And it is a lot of work. I mean, that's just a simple reality. And so, there's no getting around it. It's a matter of, are you going to do the work? And so we would have these conversations between the two of us all the time. And then I would have them in business circles, and we're like, let's just share this with the world. And maybe we can inspire someone who finds himself flat on their face or flat on their back in failure, knowing that, hey, doesn't have to be your destiny, that failure is actually a necessary ingredient to be the person that you need to be. That's one thing. And if you're in that place now, just inspiration and hope that, hey, you can overcome. And then practical application. We're not ones to just believe in big ideas. Like, what's some practical steps that we can do? So we've been on this journey, and today I get to bring someone who the universe just brought directly into my life. And, occasionally you meet someone, and in your first conversation, a first meaningful conversation, you recognize this person is in my life for a reason. And today we get to live that out. I get to have my good friend, Dr. Teddy Saddoris. Teddy, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome to the Addicted to Betterment podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I just want to make a comment about, you say the law of attraction. I am a physician, and people don't realize that our brain is electrical activity, and electricity creates magnetism. And the thoughts that we create is things that magnetize and draws people to you. And sometimes they even may repel certain people from you, And, and I always say in life is that I don't think anything is a failure. What draws you into being stuck is that you keep seeing this as a problem rather than an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to grow and to learn. I mean, a lot of times my most challenging things in my life, some of the most painful events, were the things that really directed me into a new path. And sometimes we don't see it because we're so emotionally charged about it. We want a certain outcome. We're expecting certain things. And I was talking to David, it's that we have these attachments that just create misery in our life. And I think this is one of the things is that we really want to break our limitations. And so that's kind of what we're going to be discussing further.
Yes. Well said. Yeah, you just mentioned it. I'm excited to get your thoughts today on diving in a little bit to being set free from limitations. And, I'm so excited to hear some of your wisdom around this, but for myself, I think of the things in my life that have limited me from being the person or overcoming the things. And it's usually a couple things. One, I think back and I think of all the times I blamed someone else for the actions that I was doing. It's like I'm being a bad human because they did this. And I have lots of those stories, actually. And then I
Don't we
think
all?
of, yeah, right. Well, I think I have more than most. So, and I would justify it myself because this other person was just being a terrible human. And once you get past that, you do the work, you look back and be like, oh my gosh, that was all me. It's making excuses, kind of refusing to take ownership, refusing to accept responsibility, but kind of shifting blame and making excuses for either our actions or our thoughts or not being able. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think excuses or blaming just only keeps us stuck in the problem because we become attached to that, right? Some people get attached to, I mean, I see this with people with, I treat a lot of people with addiction. And a lot of times when the person that's getting addicted is getting better, their partner finds another person that's having issues. And they just got used to, oh, you poor thing, how did you put up with this? They got addicted to all the sympathy, right? And they really were, stuck in that pattern of always finding someone that was, having issues and them being the angel that they are. We have all sorts of addictions that we become attached to. And I think one of the biggest things that I have found in my life, and I think that it might help you too, is that stop trying to fix yourself, right? Start learning to accept yourself, right? And you get that by digging inward and saying to yourself, you know, I have these feelings. I know that I don't like feeling that way because negative things just make you feel bad. And I just sit there and I release it. For me, I release it to God, but you just release it and let go of it. And you just have to realize that that person that you're having issues with is really a person there to reveal the problems you have inside yourself that you need to sit there and pray and ask God to just release you from it. The more you struggle against something, the more you're attached to it. I always tell people when they have drug problems, they'll say, I'm going to tell myself, I'm not going to take this. I'm not going to take this. And I says, but your brain doesn't hear not. All it does is say, take this, take this, right? So every time we say not do something, what we need to do is say what we're going to do instead, right? So then we're no longer attached to the problem. We've now redirected our thoughts to an action. So if I'm sitting there thinking about I want to eat those donuts or I love brownies and they're there in the kitchen. So rather than thinking focus that I'm not going to eat those and I know I'm going to, I rather sit there and redirect my thoughts to something else. And it doesn't have to be any related to food. It can just rechannel my brain to something else. And we tend to follow what our brain thinks, and a lot of times we attach our thinking to emotions. And that's the other thing I think we just need to just realize our emotions always give us poor choices in life because it's coming from a sense of pain or loss that we've had rather than a sense of I'm just in my own path. I'm not judging other people. I'm not judging myself. I'm just following what's innately in me that I love to do, that comes easy to me, that I enjoy. And if other people appreciate that, fine. If other people don't appreciate it, fine. I don't really get caught up in what people like me or don't like me. I just know that this is the route that I am meant to go. And when you're free of that, free of other people's opinions, maybe even your own opinions, because our opinions are always based on what other people said to us. They've always said, you're this, you're that, or the other, you know, and we believe those things. We've been conditioned and programmed. And, we have to start deprogramming. And you only get that by spending time with yourself, by yourself, and just release it and say, I no longer am going to be concerned about these things, and I need to find out what is my path. And when you find your path, you're going to find the universe is going to come to you. And I have an example of that. At 5 years old, I always wanted to be a doctor. My dad was a medic in the war, and it had all these people came and just thanked him for saving their life. And it just was such an impression on me. And so, I loved studying the encyclopedia on diseases. I used to think which was the worst disease to have. I compared. It was just kind of ingrained in me. And then it came, I went and joined this one church, and some people thought it was a cult. It might have been, didn't. But for me, it was a growing experience because God spoke to me and he says, I want you to give up going and be a doctor. And that was something I just felt was just in me. And and it was just such a struggle. I said, okay, God, I'm releasing this. I let it go. And then a year later, God says, I want you to go to medical school. And I'm going, but God, I gave it away. You told me to give it up. I'm okay with it. And he says, no, now's the time. And I says, well, you told me to give it up. I said, that was then, but this is now. Okay. And so sometimes when we let go of what we want so desperately, sometimes the universe gives it to us, right? But when we try to struggle, and I was beating my head against the door on things and trying to do this on my own. But when I released it, God provided finances for me, brought me the right people. I only had $50 to my name and I didn't have a place to stay. And I was walking down the street and they had a sign, room for rent includes utilities, $50. Well, that's I had, but I had no food. But then I met someone in class and I helped her with something. So I'll take you out and treat you for lunch. And so, God provided my meals. So, we have just to realize when we're in the right path that we have in our heart and we release the outcome of how it's going to come about, things just magically. I mean, it feels like magic, but just people come into your path that benefit you. And I came through medical school with no debt and I had no money. So, sometimes we have to let go of things in order to grow and then allow our own destiny unfold in its own path of how it needs to unfold.
So good. You said two things there that really jumped out at me. And I want to just kind of dive into for just a second. One, you said stop trying to fix yourself, which at surface level is like, wait, that's the total opposite of addicted to betterment, And you said something that you followed that up with. You said, love yourself and accept yourself for who you are. And, Dr. Teddy, that's sometimes one of the hardest things to do. The social, I'll call it expectations and all the noise around us. And so it's, upbringing that you've been brought up with, your parents put these expectations on you to live a certain way or believe a certain way or be a certain thing or whatever, or, it shows up in so many different ways. And, often, because you know yourself better than anyone knows you, and you know your flaws and your faults, and and so it's easy to be harder on yourself than it is to others. Talk to me a little bit more about that, about stop trying to fix yourself, and then how does someone take action to accept and love themselves at a higher level?
Yeah, I think first of all, I don't think most people really understand themselves because they're so brainwashed and conditioned. And that's where you have to do a lot of time alone. You have to sit there. I mean, for me, I'm very spiritual. And so I really sit there and I release things to God and say, these are things that I want to be the person that you've created me to be, right? Because I know when I'm the person I'm meant to be, then that's when I'm going to be the happiest. But also, more importantly, that's the one that's going to be the one that helps the people the most, because there's a genuineness about it. When we're trying to fix ourselves, we're focusing on the surface rather than the inner heart. And so when we change our heart and how we look at things and change our perspective, that changes automatically. But we're just trying to scratch the surface. And unfortunately, the surface always rises back up. You thought you got this problem, but all of a sudden you got this other one back, So because you just never dwelled into there and said, why is it this person really bother me? What is it in me that's responding? Because there's a lot of people that like that individual, but there's something in me that they're touching a nerve on. And so you need to see these things as opportunities for you to grow and to understand yourself. Because I think circumstances come in our life to bring understanding if we're willing to be open to learn. If we rather blame and complain, then we're never going to learn and we're going to keep repeating the same things. And I know I had one of my sisters and she was always having these same problems, but they kept coming up in different ways. And I says, it's because you never got to the root, right? You have to let certain things just get to the root to understand what is it they're triggering in me and what is it in me that needs to change. I don't believe in changing other people. I'm not here to change you. I'm only hoping to give you a guiding light for you to discover in yourself what you need and accept yourself. And that was probably my hardest thing to do, is just accept myself, that my motives were a lot of times not right. Most of the time, probably all the time. But, it's just that as we start becoming more aware in a way that we don't judge, and I think that's where I'm at right now, is that I'm looking at my actions as if I'm staring down at myself. I'm not putting judgment on it. I'm just observing. And when I observe what I'm doing without judgment, then I can understand better where I'm coming from. And, sometimes we never study ourselves. We're good at studying other people, right? And we put an opinion and a judgment on them, right? But we're never really good at observing ourselves. And I think that when we start understanding ourselves and what things are bothering us, and then we start understanding why, once we get the why in there, then we can start forgiving ourselves or start accepting ourselves or start loving ourselves. Because sometimes we just have to give ourselves a hug and say, if nobody else will, at least I've given myself one. You got to be kind to yourself, because even the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. But if you can't love you, you can't love anybody else, right?
So good. You're talking about a subject that I feel like hits home for all of us. And it's interesting because, so friends, Dr. Teddy comes from decades in the medical world, had her own practice for decades. Is that right?
Over 35 years, yeah.
That would definitely classify as decades. And it's interesting because I've gotten to have a few conversations with you, and I know that you come from this place of posture of grace and love. And it seems like the traditional medical person wants to, fix these things with a pill or a drug or, medication or whatever. And you come from this knowledge of that, but yet how important our heart and being centered and those things are. And when you talk about judgment, I feel like it's something that we all struggle with at some point, especially like think in today's political society. If someone views politics of the opposite view, it's easy to judge them as a person. Or, if you were raised in a very religious home, it's easy to judge yourself for things you think or do, even though you may not believe that way, but you were, raised a certain way. Or a coworker, they don't act or talk or think like you do. And so it's easy to place judgment. But I feel like where it shows up the most is on ourselves. It's easy to judge ourselves. And how would you suggest someone free themselves from that and be able to practice grace and love and mercy for their own selves? What I heard from you was it's not looking at it as right or wrong or bad or good. It's just observing and just loving yourself. Help me understand that more.
Yeah. I mean, it's called accepting yourself. I know the Bible says, how we judge others, we will be judged, right? But more importantly is that there comes of acceptance. We get into these shoulds, and then these are all conditioned things. They should do this. They should know better. They should this, that, or the other, right? It's my opinion, okay? They have their own shoulds of what I should be doing. But I think as long as I follow what's in my heart and have my heart guide me, not my brain, because my brain always puts opinions, right? But if I act out what's in my heart and follow that path, then there's that acceptance that comes along. And, if something comes up and, I don't think anything is as bad or good. I mean, I think that all things are good. And so if something comes in my path that's challenging, I see it as an opportunity for me to understand myself more. What is my initial reaction to things, and why am I feeling that way? I mean, you got to ask yourself these questions rather than just saying that you're right, but why am I feeling this way? And invariably, it comes down to things that have happened to us as children. Unfortunately, as a parent, we put expectations on our kids, and we tell them you shouldn't feel that way, or you shouldn't say those things. You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And so even though they're feeling that they want to do those things, so we allow them to not be honest with themselves. And then that lack of honesty creates what I call, I can't stab you directly, but I'll find another way around to do that. that is more socially acceptable or not recognized it came from me. And so we see our deviousness because we have learned to camouflage, I'm hurt or I'm angry. And and there is nothing wrong with feeling anger. Where the problem comes is when we speak in it. All right. We have to understand, where's the anger coming from? I mean, even Jesus got angry, right? So him being such a perfect person and gets angry, I guess that's not bad, but we have to understand, why am I feeling this way, and not respond in an emotional. If you can't separate yourself emotionally in the moment, then you need to separate yourself from the person for a while until you can understand what's causing this.
That's so good. As you were talking about accepting yourself, I think about the history of my life, and I turned 50 last year, so it's kind of one of those milestones where you reflect. And if someone knew me 15 years ago and knew me really well, on the surface, you probably would think, "Ah, he's the same person." But man, I've changed dramatically. Like, I'm not even remotely the same person. And one of the key contributing factors to that really was a catalyst for a lot of growth was accepting myself. And I think, as you were talking about that, how that played out for me is, when you don't accept yourself and you're judging yourself, and you can't share it with the world. So you kind of mentioned like hiding it, or squashing it, because on the outside you got to present this
Perfect person.
facade.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so what happens when you don't accept yourself and love yourself, it comes out in so many other ways. And it's this cycle that you can't get off, because you haven't got to the root of the problem. And it's interesting, like, you coming from the medical, background. If I have a headache, I can take, a Tylenol to get rid of my headache, but you want to know what's causing the headache, what's causing and so for me, thinking over my life, how that played out over years and years of things I would probably do different. Now I'm grateful for the journey. So I look at it as, hey, it got me to where I am today. Having said that, there are certainly things I would do different, but it was this cycle of, trying to hide imposture and not accepting and loving myself. So it, kept repeating, and almost got like worse, 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 worse. And so you articulated that so well. What is some steps that people can put in place to start that process of loving themselves and accepting themselves? Because it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. So help us. How do we do that?
I think one of the things that helps me a lot is that sometimes I'll do meditation. And I started out with visualizing. So when I would breathe in, I would breathe in all the goodness that the universe is drawing to me. And as I breathed out, I was releasing all the negative things in me. And so as I started breathing in and breathing out, it was putting me in a state of relaxation, because our spirit can't talk to us when we have a lot of noise going on, right? And so when we want certain outcomes, I mean, releasing the outcomes, releasing the expectations, accepting things as they are. And when you say that, you're breathing in all this goodness, and you're accepting all the things that have happened to you as good. And you're just releasing your frustrations, and you're breathing in calmness and clarity in your mind. So you're in a state of peace. You're no longer at war with yourself. And when you're no longer at war, then you can start hearing, right? You can hear, I don't know why I keep going back to these things, but I'm releasing it, so I'm no longer going to be affected to it. And I found that, I had a situation with my older sister, that when we had our parents die and my brother died, there was all these things that they was giving. And it was a situation where she felt like I didn't deserve anything because I had things, and she felt like she deserved it all, even though she didn't contribute to any of them, giving it to them. And so there was a lot of bitterness there, because even though I may have not needed it in terms of money, there was some things memento-wise that I would have liked to have had. And so there was anger, and there was even, I wrote this nasty letter, which I never sent to her, but it had such great prose. It was like, the more you grab, the less you'll have. It was that just thing, because you draw in the things that are negative. And finally, I saw it on my computer because I prayed to God to release me and heal me of this unforgiveness I felt in my heart. And I no longer focused on it anymore. I just let it go. Once you release it, don't dwell on it anymore. You just let it go. And it was like a year later or something, and she did something again. But it was really strange. It didn't really cause any kind of emotional reaction on me other than I felt sorrow for her. And I was praying for her because, the reason she's that way is because she doesn't believe in God is going to provide for her. And so I started praying that she will have that confidence of knowing that the universe is going to provide for her and that she doesn't have to take things from other people or claim things and try to get everything you can, right? So when you're coming from a place of feeling like you're in lack, you try to take everything. But when you're coming from a place of overflowing, which I feel like I've been given as overflowing blessings in my life, then you don't feel like you have to take it from somebody else. You would rather give out to others and allow them to overflow. And so once I started praying for her, she changed. But I had to change first because I had to get rid of my judgment and unforgiveness in order to be free for it so I could be able to pray for her to become free from her problem. And that's what comes with getting inward. And everybody does it differently. There's no, checkbook that you need to do, that what works for you.
The power of being set free from limitations. And it's interesting because, most of our listeners on Addicted to Betterment, most of our viewers, would consider themselves high performers, high achievers, leaders, that, are constantly sharpening and constantly trying to get better. And it's interesting because we often are the ones that place the most limitations on our lives. And so you've, so well articulated, how to start loving and accepting yourself and forgiving yourself. What is some other things that we do to put limitations on ourselves, and how's that show up?
I think biggest thing is our expectations of we want a certain outcome. You feel like I put this much effort in, I should get this amount out, right? I mean, that's what our society is built on, hard work, right? When it's difficult for you, you need to step back and say, is this what I'm meant to do? Because our gifts come from ease, right? I always think of God as a loving God. He would never have me do something that I hate to do, right? And when I find myself not enjoying it anymore, I got to step back and say, God, you have something different for me now. And, because I did a lot of every week for probably about 5 or 6 years, a free addiction meeting with people for about 2 hours every day, every Monday rather. And I loved it. It was no work or effort. I typed up notes to them. They had 4 or 5 pages every week. It was always something different. Then COVID hit. I wrote my book on, addiction, survivor's guidebook. And when COVID was over and we started getting back together, there wasn't the joy there anymore. And I realized if there's no joy, I need to stop. Okay. It seemed like with the job, if you're in a job and you're miserable there, I tell people God's telling you need to go. And if you don't, you'll get even more miserable. And eventually you might even get fired from the job, right? Because you're not meant to be in that space anymore. And so when you sit there and become inwardly knowledgeable of your own self, and when that happens, you release yourself of expectations and you just follow heart. I know one guy says, if you follow your heart, money comes. And he says, I don't believe that. I says, I do. Because when I follow my heart, God brought all this money towards me and he found my path for me and he brought the right people along. But when you're fighting against your destiny, it seems like it's just a chore. And it seems like you put more effort in than what the little you get back. And there comes an anger there, and there's a frustration there. And you're creating this because you have this expectation if you want it to be a certain way. And maybe it needs to be a different way, and you've got to release it and let it go.
I feel like you are speaking directly to my soul here. Multiple things. One, I had this aha moment as you were talking. it's so cool to me that you spent decades helping people heal from addiction and work through that, and now get to help people heal on Addicted to Betterment. Like, that is
I
so
thought that was
cool.
strange too.
That's so cool. Oh my gosh. So I hadn't even thought about that, but that just makes me super happy. The other thing is, talking about those harsh or hard situations that we put all this work into, and, that resonated. And I actually felt emotions, as you were talking. I recently had a business thing that was one of the biggest things I've ever worked on, and was super excited about it, and put so much effort and so much of myself into this venture, and overcome lots of obstacles, and it didn't go the way I thought it was going to. And not only did it not go the way I thought it was going to go, but following that was friction and chaos that I didn't understand. I was hurt. I was angry, to your point, very angry, didn't handle it very well. And during that time, I got in this mode where I started hardcore focusing on gratitude, knowing that I grow through what I go through, and this is meant for me. Like, this is happening for me. Ironically, I'm living that out now. As I'm way past that now, and I see the full picture, I'm like, oh my goodness, that was happening for me. And it led me to the best thing I've ever been a part of, the most exciting thing. But in that moment, I was angry. I was frustrated. I was questioning everything. I was questioning, am I, I was law of attraction. I mean, I'm manifesting, I'm law of attraction, yet it didn't happen because I was so attached to the outcome, attached to the expectations. And once I did, it wasn't easy, Dr. Teddy. It was a lot of hard work. And I can't tell you, there was days I would do 2 and 3 hours of meditation just to try to get my head right, so that I didn't become the bad person. I didn't want to act like an idiot. And so, but I get on the other side of that now. And to your point, oh my goodness, it was happening for me. I just couldn't see it. What is some steps we can do to release ourselves? Because I do believe that's the power, is releasing yourself from the expectations, the outcomes, detaching. What's some action steps people can take to get better at that?
I think the first action step is just realizing that what you're doing, especially if you're stuck in this spinning cycle, you just keep spinning, 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 and don't really see that you're going further. You need to stop. First of all, stop. And you need to step back and maybe look at it differently. We always need a different perspective, right? What is the universe trying to tell me? This isn't for you. But somehow in our thinking, and I think it's partly really the American way, you just keep going like John Wayne. We just keep pushing through, right? And you push and you push and you push and you're miserable, miserable, miserable. And you just have to realize that Einstein says keep doing the same thing over and over again is insanity and expecting a different result, right? So if you're finding that you're in that situation, sometimes you just have to step back and say, what am I supposed to do? And that's part of releasing. I no longer am going to focus on this as a problem. I'm going to just release it and say, let me be open. And you do that, the inner work. You have to sit there and say, God, thank you for revealing this to me. Most people spend their lives in limbo. I mean, they're in this kind of, they don't understand how their words affect others. They don't understand, why they're miserable. They don't understand why the relationships are bad. They don't understand why they feel that they're always unlucky. They don't realize that they're drawing these things by their repetitive thinking and patterns that they're doing. And just realizing, let me step back and understand me, right? You got to understand you and your path. Once you understand you, and for me, that required meditation. Understanding me was sitting there and releasing my emotions and saying, I cried out to God and released it all out to Him. And then I had to let Him go, let that go. And realizing I needed to feel that way because I needed to go in a different path. And so when we have a different perspective on it, I had a picture one time of half the tree was beautiful and the other had dead leaves. And it says, how are you viewing your life? Right? Right? How are you seeing it? Right? You know, and it's all a matter of how we perceive things. And as we change our perception of things, then we start drawing things new. And we go into a new path. But it's a path of things that we love to do, you know. I mean, I had one guy in my addiction treatment. He was in this job he hated. He was a welder. And I says, well, why don't you try making some flowers or doing some welding art? He started that and he loved it. I mean, he used to come in like, and then when I saw him, he was, oh, look what I just did. And this, that, and you could tell he got into his creative mode. And I think being creative triggers the child loving things. So pick up something creative, you know, start painting, start writing, start telling stories, you know, to your kids, you know, some crazy story. Don't just read a book, just create a story, a new book for them. I used to do that for my kids, and other parents would say, well, could you tell that story about this? I don't know, you know, I just made it up as I went. You know?
Oh, that's great.
But you know, we have to be creative to tap into the joy in our life.
Dr. Teddy is so good. You know, friends, we're talking about being set free from limitations, and we're all on this journey together. We are all on this journey together. And, you know, my wife has said, you know, lots of times, you know, you can tell how hard you've worked on yourself. And, you know, and I always reply, yeah, I had no idea how much work I had to do. And it's funny because it's like, I'm just getting started. I have a lot more work to do, and I don't know if it'll ever end. But, you know, thank you so much for sharing that wisdom. And friends, if you're trying to live a life without limitations, accept yourself. Truly love and accept yourself. Flaws, faults, because when you do that, you'll be able to actually love and accept other people. But you can't accept other people until you just accept yourself. Stop trying to fix yourself. Number 2, try meditation, do that sort of thing. Live in forgiveness. Don't judge. Don't judge yourself. Don't judge others. And then let's live this life without limitations. And Dr. Teddy, thank you for being on today. We're going to have some fun, and I'm excited to have your voice on Addicted to Betterment. Friends, let's go.
So you just listened to this episode. Now, join us in being addicted to betterment. Please subscribe to the show, share with your friends, tag us, and please take a moment, leave a review. Yeah, we do want your stars, but we really want the feedback.